rich woman forces her stepson to marry a homeless woman to humiliate him. But on the wedding day, what the homeless woman did shocked everyone. Claire stood by the large window of her opulent living room, watching the afternoon sunlight spill over the perfectly manicured gardens below. The room around her was a display of old-world luxury: marble floors, antique furniture, crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings. Yet none of it brought her peace. Her thoughts were consumed by Adam. Adam, the son of her late husband's first marriage, was a constant thorn in her side. He wasn't malicious or openly defiant, but his existence was a reminder of a life her husband had shared with another woman. A woman he had loved deeply before Claire ever came into the picture. Every time she looked at him, it felt like she was staring at a ghost of the past, something she could never erase. And now, with her husband gone, she was left with the daunting task of managing the family's fortune. The problem was, Adam stood in her way. For years, Claire had cultivated her place in high society. She prided herself on maintaining control of her image, her wealth, her social standing. But Adam, with his quiet demeanor and undeniable claim to his father's fortune, was a threat she needed to eliminate. She couldn't have him walking around, a young man with potential, reminding people of what she wasn't, his father's first love. As she paced across the room, her heels tapping sharply against the marble floor, an idea began to take form in her mind. If she couldn't get rid of Adam outright, she could ruin him in a way that he would never recover from. Claire's lips curled into a cold smile. Yes, a public scandal, one so severe that no one would ever take Adam seriously again. And what better way to tarnish a man's reputation than to drag him down to the lowest rung of society? That's when she remembered the woman she'd seen a few days ago, Emma. Claire had driven past her while running errands in the city, a disheveled figure sitting on the sidewalk near the park, clutching a tattered blanket around her shoulders. Emma had looked up, her eyes hollow but sharp, as if she still carried remnants of pride beneath her unfortunate circumstances. Claire knew the type. Women like Emma had once been something before life had chewed them up and spat them out. But now she was nothing. The plan crystallized quickly. If Claire could arrange a marriage between Adam and this homeless woman, the shame would be inescapable. Society would recoil at the sight of Adam, a well-bred man from an old money family, married to someone from the streets. It would be the perfect, humiliating spectacle. Claire felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought. Adam would be finished, and she would be the one to orchestrate his downfall. Meanwhile, in the study across the hall, Adam sat in his late father's chair, staring at the rows of books his father had collected over the years. The room still smelled faintly of cigar smoke, an aroma that brought memories of quiet evenings when they had discussed everything from business to life. His father had been a man of principle, someone Adam admired greatly. But now, with his passing, things had taken a dark turn. Claire, the woman who had seemed indifferent throughout much of his childhood, now held all the power, controlling the family fortune and dictating his future. When Claire summoned him to the living room, her face set in that cool, detached expression he had come to know. Adam had braced himself, but nothing could have prepared him for what she proposed. Marry a homeless woman or lose everything. The estate, the inheritance, everything his father had worked to build would slip through his fingers if he didn't comply. His chest tightened as the weight of the situation sank in. Claire wasn't bluffing. The terms of his father's will had left her with sweeping authority over the assets, and as much as Adam wanted to defy her, to walk out and never look back, he couldn't. Not without losing the home he had grown up in, the legacy his father had left behind. He felt trapped. Adam clenched his jaw, his mind racing. The thought of being publicly humiliated was unbearable. But what choice did he have? He knew Claire was playing a cruel game, but she had all the cards. Swallowing his pride, he gave a terse nod, agreeing to the arrangement. His heart pounded in his chest, but outwardly, he remained calm. As Claire watched him agree to the unthinkable, she felt a flicker of triumph. Adam had no idea what awaited him. She had found the perfect pawn in Emma, and soon the world would see Adam for the failure she believed him to be. Emma sat in the back corner of a small coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The warmth from the coffee was comforting, but it did little to settle the turmoil inside her. She stared out the window, watching the people outside bustle about their day. They all had places to be, lives to live. And here she was, at a crossroads she never imagined. Claire's offer still hung in her mind. It was as absurd as it was insulting. Marry a man she didn't know in exchange for a sum of money large enough to pull her out of the hole her life had become. For a moment she thought she had misheard when Claire approached her a few days ago, with that same cold detachment she wore like a second skin. Emma had been sitting on a park bench, watching the world pass her by when Claire had appeared, her presence as cold and sharp as the air that day. "Marry my stepson," Claire had said flatly, her eyes narrowing as if daring Emma to ask why. "You'll be well compensated. Consider it a business transaction." Emma hadn't known how to respond at first. The whole thing seemed like a joke, but Claire's tone had been deadly serious. And now, after days of mulling it over, Emma was faced with a choice she had never anticipated making. It wasn't as if Emma hadn't had other offers before. Since she'd ended up on the streets, men with various intentions had approached her, offering food, shelter, or worse, in exchange for something she wasn't willing to give. She had always refused, choosing to scrape by with her pride intact. But this was different. She took a deep breath and sipped her coffee. How had she ended up here? Just a few years ago, she had been someone entirely different. A social worker with a steady job, a purpose, a life that made sense. But everything had unraveled so quickly after her career had collapsed in a scandal that wasn't her fault. She had tried to fight it, tried to rebuild, but the system had swallowed her whole, leaving her stranded without a lifeline. Now, here she was, contemplating what felt like an impossible decision. The money was tempting. It wasn't even the amount, really, but the possibility it represented. She could get off the streets, find some stability, maybe even try to rebuild her life. But at what cost? Marrying a stranger? Being paraded around as some kind of pawn in whatever twisted game Claire was playing? Emma clenched her fist. Number. If she agreed to this, it wouldn't be on Claire's terms alone. She had been knocked down enough times to know that this was a moment to stand firm. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She glanced up and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Adam walk in. He scanned the room, looking for her, and their eyes met briefly before he walked over. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about his demeanor that caught Emma's attention. He didn't seem arrogant or cold like Claire. He seemed resigned. "Emma," he said, his voice low as he slid into the chair across from her. He didn't offer a handshake, and neither did she. They sat in silence for a moment, both taking the measure of the other. "You know why I'm here," Adam said finally, his tone flat. "This isn't something I would have chosen. I don't expect you to want this either." Emma nodded, appreciating his honesty. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. "I don't want to be anyone's pawn," she said, her voice steady. "If we're going to do this, I need to have a say." Adam leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "What do you have in mind?" Emma met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "We make a deal. Claire thinks this is just her game, but we can play by our own rules. I'm not going to let her control this. If we're going through with this, we're partners." Equal. Adam's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected such resolve from her, but there was something about the way she spoke that made him respect her instantly. She wasn't what Claire had described, a desperate woman clinging to a lifeline. She was strong, maybe even stronger than him in some ways. "All right," he said slowly. "I can agree to that." Emma allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't going to let Claire win. Not without a fight. They talked for a while longer, going over the logistics of the arrangement. Neither of them liked it, but they both understood that they had no other choice. For Adam, it was a way to preserve what little freedom he had left. For Emma, it was a chance to reclaim her life. As they parted ways, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. It was a long shot, but if they worked together, maybe, just maybe, they could turn this situation into something that neither Claire nor anyone else could have predicted. Over the next few days, Adam and Emma met several times, each encounter shedding light on aspects of their personalities neither had anticipated. What had started as an arrangement between strangers slowly morphed into something neither of them fully understood yet. Both were guarded, both bound by a sense of duty and self-preservation, but they were also beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this bizarre situation than either of them had anticipated. One evening, they sat together in a quiet restaurant, tucked into a corner booth away from prying eyes. The wedding date was looming, and though their conversations were supposed to be about the logistics of the event, they often veered into deeper, more personal territory. Adam had been raised in a world of privilege, but he had never felt truly free. Claire's grip over the family fortune had always kept him in check, preventing him from carving out his own path. He had wanted to make something of himself, to be his own man, but his late father's decision to entrust Claire with everything had left him feeling powerless. "I always thought my life was mapped out for me," Adam confessed, pushing his food around his plate. His voice was quiet but firm. "It's like I was living someone else's idea of success, not mine." Emma listened intently, her gaze fixed on Adam. She hadn't expected him to open up like this, and though she didn't say it out loud, she found his vulnerability refreshing. He wasn't the spoiled, entitled man she had imagined. He was, in many ways, trapped, just like she had been. "I get it," Emma replied softly. "Sometimes it feels like the world is pushing you into a box, telling you who you should be, and you just have to go along with it. I used to think I knew exactly where my life was headed, but things don't always go as planned." Adam looked up, surprised by the empathy in her voice. He had assumed Emma would be bitter about her situation, and maybe part of her was, but there was also a quiet strength in her, a resilience he hadn't expected. "Tell me about your life before all this," Adam asked, leaning forward slightly. "Before everything changed." Emma paused, considering how much to share. She didn't owe him her life story, but she sensed that if they were going to survive this together, honesty was important. "I was a social worker," she began, her voice steady. "I spent years helping people who had nowhere else to turn. It was hard work, but I loved it. I thought I was making a difference until—" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the table. "Until everything fell apart." Adam nodded, not pressing her for details. He didn't need to know every painful aspect of her past to understand that she had been through something profound. There was a quiet dignity in the way Emma carried herself, despite everything she had lost. He could see now that Claire's plan to humiliate him by marrying Emma was deeply flawed. Emma wasn't a weak or desperate woman. She was strong, smart, and had more integrity than most of the people in their social circle. The more Adam learned about Emma, the more he realized that Claire's scheme wasn't going to go the way she intended. Emma wasn't someone who could be broken easily, and the more time he spent with her, the more he felt himself drawn to her resilience. They had both been pushed into this situation, but together, maybe they could find a way out. For Emma, the dinners with Adam were a chance to rediscover the parts of herself she thought had been lost. She had spent so long feeling like a shadow of who she used to be, but Adam's genuine curiosity about her past reminded her that she still had value. She wasn't just the homeless woman Claire had plucked off the streets for her twisted game. She was someone who had once made a difference, and maybe she could again. Their conversations began to shift from transactional to something more personal. Adam shared stories of his childhood, of how he had never truly felt like he belonged in the world Claire inhabited. Emma, in turn, spoke about the people she had helped in her previous life, the ones who had been forgotten by society but still deserved a second chance. As the wedding drew nearer, the bond between them grew stronger. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was something real, an alliance between two people who had been underestimated by the very person trying to control them. They both knew that the wedding was just the beginning, and neither of them was willing to let Claire dictate their futures. The plan was starting to take shape in both their minds. They would go through with the wedding, as Claire wanted, but they would do it on their own terms. Emma had an idea of how to turn the tide, and Adam, now seeing her strength firsthand, was ready to stand by her side. Together, they might just be able to pull off something Claire never saw coming. Claire stood in her lavish office, glancing over the final list of wedding invitations. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite: socialites, politicians, influential business figures. It was a spectacle she had meticulously planned, her pièce de résistance. The wedding would be held at the Grand Family Estate, a symbol of old money and power, and every detail had been arranged to ensure maximum visibility. Claire reveled in the thought of what was to come. In her mind, Adam's public humiliation was inevitable. Marrying a woman like Emma, someone society would never accept, would ruin his reputation permanently. She couldn't have been more confident in her plan. She put down the list and smiled to herself, imagining the whispers that would follow the ceremony. The scandal would spread like wildfire, tarnishing Adam's name and securing her control over the family's fortune. Claire's assistant knocked on the door, interrupting her thoughts. "Everything is set for the wedding, Mrs. Harrington. The caterers, florists, and the media contacts have all confirmed." Claire gave a satisfied nod. "Good. Let's make sure this is a day no one forgets." Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Adam and Emma were preparing in their own way. Adam had reluctantly agreed to wear the tailored suit Claire had sent, though it felt more like armor than anything else. He stared at himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie, feeling a strange mix of emotions. This wedding wasn't what he wanted, but there was something about the way Emma had handled herself over the past few weeks that gave him hope. She had been calm, composed, and utterly unshaken by the weight of Claire's plan. It was inspiring, and it made him believe they might still have a chance to turn this around. Emma, on the other hand, was sitting quietly in her small apartment, carefully folding a dress she had chosen for the day. Claire had offered her a designer gown, one that likely cost more than Emma had earned in a year back when she still had a job, but she had refused. Instead, she had found something simple, elegant, and true to herself. This was not about playing into Claire's vision of the spectacle. Emma knew that the wedding would be her moment, and she intended to control the narrative. As she folded the dress, she rehearsed the speech she had been preparing in her mind. She knew she couldn't let this day pass without making a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been pushed aside or silenced. Emma wasn't going to let Claire's manipulative game define her or Adam. This was their chance to take control, and Emma had every intention of doing just that. The day of the wedding crept closer, and as the date approached, tensions in the Harrington household grew. Claire's smug demeanor only fueled Adam's growing sense of determination. Every time he saw her, with her perfectly composed smile and calculating eyes, he was reminded of why he had to go through with this. But what Claire didn't know was that Adam and Emma had been preparing for something far more than just a ceremony. When the invitations were sent out, the news of the wedding spread quickly. It became a topic of conversation in every elite circle, and the whispers of disapproval started to take shape. People couldn't believe Adam, the heir to one of the most prominent families in the city, would marry someone like Emma. Some viewed it as a disgrace, while others were simply curious. But no one knew the truth. No one understood the layers beneath the surface, least of all Claire. In the days leading up to the wedding, Adam and Emma met several times to finalize their own plans. They kept their discussions quiet, speaking in low voices in secluded cafes and parks, where Claire wouldn't be able to monitor them. It was during these conversations that Adam began to realize how strong Emma truly was. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was planning to make a statement. The quiet confidence that radiated from her gave him hope. If anyone could turn this situation around, it was her. "I've been thinking about what I'll say," Emma mentioned one evening as they sat at a small table tucked away in a corner of a dimly lit restaurant. Adam leaned forward, intrigued. "And?" Emma's eyes sparkled with determination. "I'm not going to let this be a humiliation for us, Adam. I'm going to use that platform, that crowd, to speak my truth. This won't be the disaster Claire expects it to be. It'll be our moment." Adam nodded, feeling a sense of resolve building inside him. Emma had already made her plans, and he was ready to stand by her, no matter what. As the final preparations fell into place, both Adam and Emma knew they were heading towards something bigger than either of them had anticipated. Claire might have orchestrated this wedding as a way to shame Adam, but little did she know, the tide was about to turn. The stage was set, and the players were ready. The only thing left was the moment itself. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of tension. Claire moved through the Harrington estate with an air of satisfaction, completely convinced that everything was proceeding according to her plan. She oversaw every detail, from the arrangements for the ceremony to the seating chart, making sure that the guest list was filled with only the most powerful and influential figures in their social circle. Each detail was carefully designed to ensure Adam's humiliation would be as public as possible. Claire's confidence radiated in every step she took, but Adam could sense the growing storm beneath it all. Each passing day made it harder for him to mask his frustration. Every interaction with Claire felt like a calculated move in her game, and while he maintained a calm exterior, his resentment toward her deepened. He had always known Claire to be manipulative, but this felt like something darker, a final, cruel attempt to break him entirely. Despite his anger, Adam had learned to play along, knowing that confrontation with Claire would get him nowhere. She had too much power, too much control over the family fortune, and Adam was still bound by the terms of his father's will. But what Claire didn't know was that her grip over him was loosening. Adam wasn't the same naive young man she had once manipulated. He had spent the past weeks working alongside Emma, and in doing so, had begun to find a sense of freedom in their shared determination. Emma, in contrast, remained remarkably calm. As the wedding day drew closer, her resolve only strengthened. She knew Claire expected her to be timid and broken, but Emma wasn't afraid. She had faced worse in her life, and this wasn't a battle she intended to lose. The key was not to fight on Claire's terms. Emma had her own plans, and they didn't involve playing the role of a victim. Sitting in her small, rented apartment, Emma reviewed her speech again. It was more than just words to her. It was a declaration of everything she believed in. She thought about the people she had worked with as a social worker, those who had been pushed aside by society, much like she had been. This was her chance to speak for them, to reclaim her dignity in a setting where the odds were stacked against her. She wasn't just going through the motions of a forced wedding. She was preparing for a moment that could change the course of her life and Adam's. Over the next few days, Adam and Emma met in secret, their conversations focused and strategic. Adam had grown protective of Emma, not out of duty, but out of genuine respect. He was beginning to see her as more than just the woman Claire had chosen to humiliate him. She was strong, intelligent, and fiercely independent, qualities that Adam admired more with each passing day. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond that had formed over shared purpose and mutual defiance of Claire's control. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Adam asked one evening as they sat in the back of a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "I've been ready for this my whole life, Adam. This isn't just about me or you. It's about standing up for something bigger." Adam nodded, absorbing her words. He had never met anyone like Emma before. She wasn't afraid of Claire's power, and in many ways, that made her the strongest person in the room. For Adam, her presence was a reminder that he, too, could break free from the life he had been forced into. Together, they could confront Claire and dismantle the trap she had so carefully set. As the final preparations for the wedding fell into place, Claire remained oblivious to the shift in dynamics. She still believed that both Adam and Emma were under her control, that they would simply follow her script and take their places in her public spectacle. But Adam and Emma had rewritten the script in their own way, one that Claire would never see coming. Behind closed doors, Adam found himself growing more confident in the plan. Emma's quiet strength fueled his determination to stand by her side, no longer as a passive participant, but as an active partner in turning the tables on Claire. This wasn't just about protecting his reputation anymore. It was about standing up for something real, something important. With the wedding just days away, the tension between Adam and Claire finally reached a breaking point. Though the words between them were civil, their interactions were laced with unspoken challenges. Claire still carried herself with smug confidence, certain that Adam was falling neatly into her trap. But Adam no longer felt afraid. He had found his own strength in Emma, and he knew that together they would face whatever came next head-on. The wedding day loomed like a storm on the horizon, but Adam felt ready for it. He wasn't the same person he had been when Claire first laid out her ultimatum, and neither was Emma. The stage was set, but the ending would be something Claire had never anticipated. As they prepared for the big day, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in his life, he was finally in control. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the sprawling grounds of the Harrington estate. Claire had spared no expense in transforming the estate into a picturesque venue for the ceremony. Elegant floral arrangements lined the pathways, and white silk draped over the chairs arranged in neat rows facing a grand altar. Everything gleamed with the opulence and grandeur that was expected of a Harrington wedding. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared to be a day of celebration, a union that would unite two people in love. But for Adam and Emma, it was anything but. Guests began arriving early, stepping out of sleek cars in designer attire, their eyes bright with curiosity and anticipation. Whispers filled the air as they greeted one another, exchanging speculative glances about the bride, Emma, whom many had never heard of before. The entire city's elite had gathered, not just to celebrate a wedding, but to witness what was rumored to be a scandalous affair. The gossip was rife. What kind of woman would Adam, the heir to the Harrington fortune, marry under such unusual circumstances? Claire stood near the entrance, greeting guests with her usual poised smile, but there was a smugness in her demeanor that couldn't be missed. She relished the thought of what was to come, certain that Adam's disgrace was just a few hours away. Her gown, a shimmering silver that caught the sunlight, was perfectly chosen to signal her status as the matriarch of the Harrington family. She floated from group to group, whispering her own versions of the story, ensuring that everyone knew how unexpected this match had been. It was a performance of control, and Claire was at the center of it, orchestrating every move. Inside the estate, Adam stood in front of a tall mirror, adjusting his suit for what felt like the 100th time. His nerves buzzed under his skin, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, not just in terms of the wedding, but mentally. This was the day everything would change. He caught a glimpse of Emma through the doorway as she finished getting ready in the next room. Emma was wearing the simple dress she had chosen, one that reflected her own understated elegance. She stood still as she looked at herself in the mirror, her hands calm as they smoothed the fabric of her dress. The morning had been quiet for her, the calm before the storm. She had known this day would come, and now, standing on the cusp of it, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. Claire's eyes would be on her, expecting her to crumble. But Emma had no intention of playing that role. She was here on her own terms. Adam stepped into the room, catching Emma's eye. "You look perfect," he said, his voice steady but sincere. There was no trace of the awkwardness that had been between them when they first met. Now there was something like mutual respect, a sense that they were in this together, both ready to face what was to come. "Thanks," Emma said, her lips curving into a small smile. "You don't look so bad yourself." There was warmth in her tone, and Adam felt a flicker of relief. Whatever happened today, they were united. Outside, the guests were ushered into their seats, and the murmurs of conversation grew quieter as the ceremony was about to begin. Claire took her place at the front, her eyes scanning the crowd with satisfaction. Everything was going exactly as planned. As Adam and Emma stepped out together and made their way toward the altar, the air felt heavy with expectation. The guests watched, some in disbelief, others in awe. Adam held his head high, his expression unreadable, while Emma remained composed, her eyes forward. They walked in unison, side by side, as though they were about to face a challenge rather than exchange vows. When they reached the front, the officiant began the ceremony. Adam barely heard the words. His focus was on the moment, on the tension in the air, and on Emma standing beside him, unflinching. He could feel Claire's gaze on them, sharp and watchful. She believed that this was the moment of their downfall, but Adam knew better. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the turning point, the moment when everything would shift. As the officiant prepared to ask them to exchange vows, there was a pause. Emma took a deep breath, ready to take the stage in a way no one had anticipated. She glanced at Adam, who gave her a subtle nod of reassurance. The plan they had discussed was about to unfold. The guests leaned in, sensing that something was coming, but none of them knew what. Not yet. Emma stepped forward, her heart steady, her voice clear. She was ready to speak her truth, to transform this spectacle into something far more powerful than Claire had ever imagined. The moment was hers. Emma stepped forward, her movements deliberate, her face calm as she turned to face the crowd. There was a murmur of confusion that rippled through the guests, their eyes wide as they watched the bride take center stage in the middle of her own wedding. Claire, sitting near the front, narrowed her eyes, her smile faltering just slightly as she sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. The officiant glanced at Emma, unsure of what to do, but she gave him a gentle nod, signaling that she needed a moment. Emma stood tall, her hands resting lightly at her sides as she began to speak. Her voice, though soft at first, carried through the silent crowd, growing stronger with each word. "Before we go any further, I feel like there's something I need to say," she began, her gaze sweeping across the sea of unfamiliar faces. "Most of you don't know me. Some of you may have heard things, stories about who I am, where I come from, and if you've heard anything, you've probably heard the worst of it." There was a pause, and Emma let the weight of her words settle in. She wasn't here to plead or defend herself. She was here to tell the truth, on her own terms. "I was once a social worker," she continued, her voice steady. "I worked with people who had been forgotten, people who had lost everything, sometimes through no fault of their own, sometimes because life just didn't give them the same opportunities. And I loved that work. I loved helping people, being there for them when no one else would be. But life, as it often does, threw me a curveball." The guests leaned forward, their interest piqued. Adam, standing beside her, listened intently, knowing that this was Emma's moment. She had warned him that she was going to speak, but even he hadn't known exactly what she would say. "I made a mistake," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not a crime, not something unforgivable, but a mistake that cost me everything. My job, my career, my stability. It was all gone in an instant, and for a long time I felt like I didn't have a place in this world anymore." She paused again, taking a deep breath as she glanced briefly at Adam. His gaze was unwavering, filled with quiet support. That was all she needed to continue. "For a while I lived on the streets," she said, the honesty of her words sending a ripple through the crowd. "I was invisible, like so many others. But what I learned during that time was that we all have the power to come back from the edge. We all deserve second chances, even when the world tells us we don't." Claire shifted in her seat, her face tight with barely concealed frustration. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Emma wasn't supposed to be standing up there, speaking with such conviction. This was supposed to be a humiliation, not a platform for redemption. Emma's voice grew stronger. This marriage, this day, might look like something designed to tear me down, but I see it differently. I see it as a chance to remind all of you, and myself, that we aren't defined by where we come from, or the mistakes we've made. We're defined by how we rise, after we fall. The silence in the room was palpable. The guests, once filled with judgment and curiosity, now seemed to be hanging on Emma's every word. Even the whispers had ceased, replaced by a sense of awe at the courage she was displaying. "And so," Emma continued, her gaze sweeping the room, "I stand here today, not as someone to be pitied or mocked, but as someone who is choosing to take control of her own narrative. I won't let anyone else, no matter how powerful, decide my worth." There was a pause, and in that moment, the weight of her words seemed to sink in for everyone. The crowd, so used to their world of privilege and social games, was witnessing something unexpected. A woman who refused to play by their rules. A woman who had been thrown into a situation meant to destroy her, but who had found strength instead. Emma turned to Adam, her voice softening just slightly. "And I won't let this marriage be about shame. It's about something bigger, about taking back control, about finding dignity in even the most difficult circumstances." Adam felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest. He had never imagined this day could hold so much meaning. What had started as a forced arrangement had become a moment of revelation, not just for Emma, but for him as well. He took her hand, silently vowing to stand by her in this new chapter of their lives, whatever it might bring. The crowd remained silent, stunned by the power of Emma's speech. Even Claire, who had orchestrated this entire event, seemed frozen in her seat, her carefully crafted plan unraveling before her eyes. Emma's words hung in the air, a quiet, powerful reminder that even in the face of the most impossible circumstances, dignity and strength could still prevail. Adam stood beside Emma, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. The entire room seemed frozen, stunned by the raw honesty and strength that had just filled the space. He had expected this wedding to be a formality, something to endure, but now it felt like the moment had transformed into something much larger than either of them had anticipated. It wasn't just about the two of them anymore. It was about challenging everything that had been carefully staged by Claire. Adam tightened his grip on Emma's hand, drawing strength from her courage. He hadn't planned to speak, but as he looked out at the faces in the audience, many of whom he had grown up with, people who had always seen him as the quiet, compliant heir to the Harrington fortune, he realized that this was his moment too. He stepped forward, feeling a strange sense of clarity. "Emma's right," he said, his voice breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "This day, this marriage, was never supposed to be about love. Not at first. It was supposed to be a business transaction, a way to humiliate both of us in front of all of you. And I'll be honest, at first I thought that's all it would be." The guests exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by his bluntness. Adam had always been seen as the dutiful son, the quiet one who never made waves. But there was something different in his tone now, something that commanded attention. "But then I got to know Emma," he continued, his gaze shifting to her, "and I realized that she's so much more than what people think when they hear her story. She's not just the woman Claire brought in to bring me down. She's strong, intelligent, and she's someone who deserves to be respected." Adam turned back to the crowd, his voice growing more confident. "This marriage is no longer about what Claire wanted. It's about what Emma and I want, and we've decided that we're not going to let anyone, not society, not family, not wealth, decide our future for us." The murmur that had been building in the room suddenly quieted as Adam spoke. For the first time, he wasn't just a figurehead, a young man in the shadow of his father's legacy. He was standing on his own, and it was clear that he had finally found his voice. "We've all been raised to believe that status and reputation are everything," Adam said, his voice steady. But today I've realized that there's something much more important. Integrity. Doing what's right, standing by the people who matter. And that's what I intend to do. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settling in. I'm standing by Emma, not because I have to, but because I want to. And together, we're going to build something better than what was planned for us. The room remained silent, the guests clearly processing what was unfolding before them. This wasn't the public disgrace they had come to witness. Instead, they were seeing the beginning of something much different, something that carried real meaning. Adam turned to Emma, his voice soft but filled with resolve. I promise to stand by you, not just today, but every day from now on. We're going to do this our way. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. She had always known that Adam was more than the quiet figure he presented to the world, but seeing him stand up in front of this crowd, in front of Claire, made her realize just how strong he had become. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, hand in hand, facing the guests. The weight of what they had just said lingered in the air, challenging the assumptions and expectations of everyone in the room. It wasn't the spectacle that had been planned, but it was something far more profound. Claire, sitting in the front row, was stone-faced, her usual composure cracking ever so slightly. This wasn't the outcome she had orchestrated. She had expected Adam to remain docile, to go through the motions and accept his fate. But now, as she watched him and Emma standing side by side, united and unafraid, Claire realized that her plan had backfired spectacularly. The crowd began to stir, whispers spreading as the gravity of the moment set in. Some of the guests, particularly those closest to Claire, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked intrigued, perhaps even impressed, by the unexpected turn of events. Adam felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The decision had been made. He wasn't bound by Claire's manipulation anymore. Standing beside Emma, he knew they had the strength to face whatever came next. This was their moment, and they had claimed it. With the ceremony still unfinished, Adam looked to the officiant who was standing by, unsure of how to proceed. Adam nodded, signaling that they were ready to move forward, but this time on their own terms. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was the beginning of something new. Claire sat in stunned silence as Adam and Emma stood together at the altar, their quiet defiance unraveling the carefully laid plans she had spent months orchestrating. Her grip on the polished armrest of her chair tightened, her nails digging into the fabric. This was not how the day was supposed to unfold. She had envisioned Adam humiliated, his reputation shattered, his future tied to a woman who, in her eyes, would drag him down. Instead, the opposite was happening. Adam and Emma were standing together, united and strong, with the entire crowd hanging on their every word. For the first time, Claire felt a sense of something she wasn't used to: powerlessness. She had always been in control, always able to manipulate situations to her advantage. But now her influence was slipping through her fingers. Her face remained impassive as she watched the ceremony continue, but inside a storm was brewing. She could feel the whispers behind her, the subtle shift in the air as the guests began to see the cracks in the image she had so carefully curated. As the officiant continued the ceremony, Claire's mind raced. What could she do to salvage this? Her reputation was on the line now, not just Adam's. The people here were not just guests. They were the most influential figures in their social circle, people who had always admired her control over the Harrington legacy. She had built her entire identity around that power, but now it was unraveling before her very eyes. Meanwhile, Adam felt the weight of his decision lift as he exchanged a glance with Emma. The vows they were about to take no longer felt like a formality. This marriage, once a trap designed to humiliate them both, had transformed into something real, something meaningful. He didn't need to look at Claire to know what she was thinking. He could feel her cold fury from across the room. But it didn't matter. For the first time in his life, Adam felt free from her grasp. Emma, too, felt the shift in the room. She had spoken her truth, and it had resonated with the guests in a way she hadn't expected. She had stood in front of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city, and instead of being crushed under their scrutiny, she had risen above it. The look in their eyes had changed, no longer filled with judgment or pity, but something closer to respect. It was a victory, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the officiant guided them through the final words of the ceremony, Adam and Emma exchanged rings. The simple bands felt heavy with meaning, a symbol not of a forced arrangement, but of the choice they had made to face the future together. Their hands clasped firmly, not as strangers, but as allies. They had come into this marriage as pawns in someone else's game, but now they were writing their own story. The crowd remained quiet, the usual murmur of gossip replaced by something else, a kind of reverence for what had just unfolded before them. Even those who had come to witness a spectacle of disgrace could feel the undeniable shift in tone. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was real. After the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, there was a brief pause, and then polite applause filled the room. The applause was hesitant at first, as if the guests weren't sure how to respond, but it quickly gained momentum. People stood clapping more enthusiastically than they had planned to, some even smiling, impressed by the strength Adam and Emma had shown. Adam felt a swell of pride as he looked out at the crowd. This wasn't the outcome Claire had envisioned, but it was exactly what he and Emma had hoped for. As they turned to walk down the aisle, hand in hand, there was no shame, no sense of defeat. They were walking out of the room not as victims, but as equals, ready to face whatever came next, together. But as they left the altar, Claire remained seated, her applause notably absent. Her face was a mask of icy composure, but inside she was seething. She had lost control and there was no denying it. The whispers that had once circled around Adam were now circling around her. The guests, once so eager to follow her lead, were now exchanging glances, their opinions shifting in real time. Claire's grip on her place in society, on the Harrington legacy, was weakening. As Adam and Emma made their way out of the hall, Claire's eyes followed them, her mind scrambling for a way to regain control. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her plan had backfired, and now she was the one left behind, isolated and powerless, with the entire room watching her downfall. Adam and Emma had won, and as the doors closed behind them, the world they had both feared seemed just a little bit smaller, and their future a little brighter. In the weeks following the wedding, Adam and Emma's lives took an unexpected turn. What had started as a ploy to ruin Adam's reputation had become something far more powerful. The story of their unlikely marriage, and especially Emma's moving speech, spread through the city, sparking conversations about resilience, redemption, and the dignity of second chances. The media, which had once been poised to mock the event, now painted it as a story of triumph over adversity. The couple became a symbol of strength, standing against the expectations of the elite society that had once sought to dismiss them. Adam and Emma, no longer living in the shadow of Claire's control, found their own path together. They moved forward with purpose, using the publicity from their wedding to launch a new initiative. With Adam's wealth and Emma's experience as a social worker, they established a foundation aimed at supporting the homeless and underprivileged. It was a way for Emma to return to the work she loved, but this time with the resources to make an even bigger impact. Their cause resonated with many, drawing support from unexpected places. People who had once been skeptical of Emma's past now saw her as a figure of inspiration. And Adam, once seen as a passive heir, was now respected for standing by her side. Claire, however, found herself increasingly isolated. Her plan to control Adam and maintain her hold over the family's fortune had crumbled. The elite circles she had once commanded with ease began to distance themselves, sensing her fall from grace. The whispers at parties now focused on her failure, her once impeccable reputation tarnished by the very spectacle she had orchestrated. For the first time, Claire felt the sting of irrelevance, left to watch as Adam and Emma's influence grew, while hers waned. For Adam and Emma, life after the wedding was not without its challenges, but they faced them together. What had once been a forced arrangement had evolved into a true partnership. They found common ground in their desire to make a difference, and as they worked side by side, their bond deepened into something real. Their relationship, forged in adversity, blossomed into something far stronger than either of them had expected. As they stood together on the steps of their newly opened foundation's headquarters, looking out at the crowd gathered to support their cause, Adam turned to Emma and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with determination. And this is just the beginning. Together they had turned what was meant to destroy them into a source of strength, building a future on their own terms, a future filled with hope, purpose, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of circumstances. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.